I don't need that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Culture. Today's event is hosted by Bridge Michigan. Myself and Amber here are on Bridge Michigan staff, and you'll be hearing from us today. Thank you all for joining us today. In case you aren't familiar with us, Bridge MI is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and your community. You can subscribe for free at bridgemi.com. Also, those who are current Bridge Club members, which are people who've donated to Bridge over the last year, get a number of benefits, including access to a free electronic copy of each Bridge Culture Club selection. You can become a member today by visiting the link that we will drop into the chat in just a moment. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by author Sue Leaf. I will give a full introduction of her momentarily, but we are incredibly honored that she's willing to join us for discussion of this book. The schedule for today's discussion is this. I'll give a quick introduction of Sue Leaf, and then I'll pass it over to Amber, who will lead the discussion with Sue about the book for about 40 minutes. And then we'll take reader questions for the author, which you can type your questions into the chat at any time. And we are prepared to conclude at 1 p.m. today. We will be recording this discussion, and we will be posting the recording on Bridge's website, www.bridgemi.com. And now I'd like to introduce our author here today, Sue Leaf. Sue Leaf is a Minnesota native and was trained as a zoologist and taught environmental science. She writes on natural history and environmental topics from her home on the shores of Pioneer Lake. An avid hiker, paddler, cross-country skier, and birdwatcher, Leaf believes that being attuned to nature is good for the soul. And now I'll pass it over to Amber to get us started.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And Sue, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so honored.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Well, as you can see from the many people who have joined us for today's discussion, your book, Impermanence, left a very big impression on a lot of our readers, and we're excited to talk with you about it today. So this is Bridge Culture Club, which is sort of a bi-monthly gathering of folks where we talk about either books or films or other media that have some connection to Michigan. So to get us started, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about sort of your own connections to Lake Superior and the UP, and what sort of drove you to write Impermanence.
Well, as I mentioned in the book, my first exposure to the South Shore of Lake Superior was in 1977 when I went on a bike trip with my then boyfriend. Like, it was kind of a, let's test this guy out and see if he's worth hanging with anymore. And we got into the campground in the dark. We had pedaled from Ontonagon's downtown area where the bus dropped us off out to the campgrounds in the total dark. And when I woke up the next morning, I could not believe that here was this huge body of water and there were no rocks. It was entirely sand. And I thought, wow, this is Lake Superior. And I was in the 10 days that we were gone, well, I learned that people swim in Lake Superior and it's wonderful. And so we were smitten by the South Shore. And then Tom took a job in 1983 in Ashland, and then the UP was closer for us. So that year we started cross-country skiing in the Ironwood area. And then when we had children, the sand beaches were the perfect place to bring children for a vacation because you've got all this sandbox and it's not hard. It's hard to lose track of them because there's nothing between you and the kid on the beach. So we vacationed there for several years in the Ontonagon area. And we would have gladly had a cabin in Ontonagon. It was just too far of a reach for us in where we were going to be living. So we started looking for our own cabin in, I think it was 1988. By then we had 3 small children and we found one right away. And this is the place we still have. And we have gone to the UP, in the 80s, we had some very dry, very hot spells, and we used the UP as a refuge, as a haven, and I'm sure we're not alone in that, and I'm sure we will not be alone in that in the future. But I remember coming from Center City, which is where I'm living now, and getting to Wakefield and getting out of the car. And it was already cool, and it was just like, whew, the pressure of having a really hot environment was just lifted. So I think it almost took on a kind of a mythical aspect at that point for me. Yeah, so that's my short explanation to my relationship.
I love that. And I think, I learned so much from this book. I thought it had such an interesting sort of combination of memoir, but you also gave us so much of the natural and ecological history, as well as sort of, the history involving the people of the South Shore of Superior. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you settled on that format and any research you had to do to put it all together?
Yeah, well, that format is what all my books are about, like, including the biographies. When I started thinking about it this morning, I thought, yeah, the biographies, I always set the people's lives in historical context. And I'm always because there's both of the biographies involve scientists. Um, I'm very interested in what they see surrounding them through a scientific lens. I have had an editor. I've only had one book rejected, and it found a publisher almost immediately after, but it was rejected by the editor because she said she couldn't put my book into a slot. It wasn't exactly memoir. It wasn't exactly natural history. It wasn't exactly nonfiction. And so what the heck was it? We don't know what we'd call it in the catalog. But I think that's maybe one of the strengths of my book, is that it's the whole picture. And you mentioned that it's scientific writing, but it's not chemistry or physics. It's biology and geology, because that's how I see. And I do that, right, because I want readers to see everything all at once. I don't want anything that I think might be important to be slighted. And I was also thinking, and probably Michiganders can relate to this, there is a sense in writing just pure memoir, I feel like it's all about me, me, me. And I was raised from a very small child that it's not all about me. And so I feel like I owe the reader something beyond memoir, or in addition to memoir, to make what I'm writing about their own experience and not just my experience. And furthermore, I mean, I think there's this element of the mothers in our lives saying, well, why do you think you're so special? you're not any better than anybody else. And so that's one way to have memoir, the me in memoir, recede from the picture so people can see the picture itself. I was also reminded, our Governor Walz was recently quoted, I think, in the New York Times as being a Minnesota Lutheran, which means that you can't do anything good and then brag about it, or it doesn't count. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's part of it, is I have to have more in a memoir than just my own personal experience. Is that a huge answer to a small question? So
I loved it. I just thought it really was a format unlike I'd read before. And I loved the way you sort of brought all of those threads together. I was curious for the memories that you shared. You talked about all these snapshots of different points of your life. Were you relying upon sort of solely memory, or did you have journals that you could rely upon? Tell us about how that all came back.
I write journals. I've written journals since I was about 10, and I've written continuously since my marriage. And I no longer write daily. I think I gave up writing. Well, I gave up writing daily right away. Let these planes go overhead. Can you hear those planes? Yeah, they're flying from Fort Snelling up to Duluth. It's National Guard training.
I see.
Oh, what were we talking about again?
Your journals and how they help
Oh, yeah,
you.
yeah. Yes, I write in journals all the time. When the kids were small, I used to write dialogue as, conversations between them and me as a toddler, which has proved hilarious now 30 years later. I write about historical context because I'm well aware that most people don't keep journals anymore. Or if they do it, they're ephemeral, they're online and you don't have a hard copy, so you might not ever have them at your fingertips. And I have the notebooks from a Canadian firm that are hardcover and a sewn binding, but they're lined. And I get 2 or 3 at a time, which now when I'm 70, I think to myself, this is really pushing fate that I'm ordering 3 journals at once, expecting I'm going to be living long enough to fill the 3rd journal in. But anyway, that means they're all uniform, and I must have 40 or 50 different volumes that date way back. Yeah, I usually fill maybe one every 9 months or so, like that. Yep.
Very cool. And it gives you, then that's what I think for me as a reader just added so much to, like, it personalized so much of what you were telling us. And I really enjoyed that. So I have a couple of questions about sort of your process, because we do these meetings every other month, and our readers have shared with me that sometimes they find it really fascinating to learn about sort of how books come together. So, you talked with a lot of folks who have a variety of connections to the South Shore of Superior. So can you tell us about sort of how you got connected with all of those various experts in their fields or their hobbies, and if any of them really particularly stood out to you as memorable?
Yes, okay, so for all the books I've written, I not except the biographies, I usually start by making a list of essays that could go in a book like this. With Impermanence, I was going to write a book on the South Shore. And then I came up with 20 different topics I could write on, including personal topics like our bike trip and our move to Ashland. And then I think, and what do I need to know to be able to write an essay on, say, the shipwrecks? What do I need to know to write an essay on wild rice? And I try and figure that out. And then I'm old enough now, and I've done enough professional work here in the upper Midwest that I have contacts. For example, Faith Fitzpatrick with the USGS in Madison, Wisconsin. My son works with her. He works for the USGS, so he put me in contact with her. Or the going through the locks on a freighter, an ore freighter. That was my first cousin. I mean, he's something he does every day. The contact I wanted to talk about was Mike Wiggins, who at that time was the tribal chief for the Bad River Band of Chippewas. There was we were at the cabin for a week, and there was one day when 3 different people who were not related to each other and didn't know each other told me if I really wanted to find out about the wild rice beds and the Bad River Reservation, I should talk to Mike Wiggins. And I thought, my gosh, if this is not karma, I don't know what is. I really need to get a hold of this guy. And the third person that told me that was April Stone, who was also a member of the Bad River Band. And I said, do you have a contact for Mike? And she actually did. So she gave me his cell phone, and I texted him and said, I'd really like to sit down and talk with you. And I think I had to go up to the store in Port Wing to send my text because we didn't have internet at our cabin. And I wasn't even out of the parking lot for the store when I got a reply from him saying, I can meet with you today. What time can you get here? And so Tom and I had been planning to take a bike ride, and I came back to the cabin. I said, you know what, I can't do that because I'm going to have to drive to Bad River today. And Mike took me down the Kakagan River to where the wild rice beds grew. And the Bad River Reservation is so gorgeous. This was early May, and the wild rice had not emerged from the water yet. It was growing, but it was deep underwater. Wild rice has to reseed every year. It doesn't grow from tubers like cattails do. And so it takes a while before it breaks the surface of the water. But Mike had the boat and knew where the beds were and took me around to see it. And in the wildlife that was there, I was just, gosh, it was memorable. And he turned out to be just amazing. He made the Ojibwe stories, the origin stories, to come to life. And he, rather than tell me in a linear fashion, he drew me a picture of how the reservation, they see it as in a cradle with the rim of the bowls being the Bayfield Peninsula and Birch Hill on the way to Ironwood. And inside this cradle are all the resources that the Ojibwe need of Bad River to survive. It was so cool. Yes. So he was one very memorable contact expert.
That was such a cool story, and the understanding of sort of the relationships with nature, that was a really neat story. This is a follow-up to, I was very fascinated by the story of the bobbers and sort of how they do. You talked about how your sort of perspective on that style of fishing changed. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Your first impression of the bobbers is these guys are nuts. When in 1983, when I saw them, we it must have been on the bay in Chequamegon Bay, and you could see the little tiny figures way out on the ice, and we think, what the heck are they doing out there? And then someone in the know said, they're fishing for lake trout, and they want to get their lake trout runs big, and but you have to be out in deep water to get lake trout. You have to be out in 200 feet of water, and the bay is more shallow than that. So they would take their snowmobiles out to the edge of the ice and then cut a hole and drop a line that would be 200 feet deep. And the lake trout are really big. I mean, they're like 3-4 feet long, and they most of the time they don't keep them. They take a picture and then they drop them because those guys are going to be good breeders to maintain the population. But as I read a book, an unpublished book called Blood on the Ice, that was some administrator in the Ashland public school system had interviewed people. He too was fascinated by the bobbers, interviewed them. And you began to see that there was more to it than just big fish, that there was a sense that they liked being on their own. They liked being self-reliant in a way that required skill and learning and almost intuition about the changing conditions and how to survive them. And also an alertness to how they do change, because it can, Lake Superior can change really quickly. And what seemed to be stable ice that they were on all of a sudden can break off and start drifting away. And so yeah, I began to see it in context of wilderness, the wilderness experience, because I think in another essay I write about what is a wilderness. Yes, I do, with the Apostle Islands, right? What is a wilderness, and is there any true wilderness left on planet Earth if everything is affected by climate change, which is, a human fingerprint on the entire planet. So then I began to see the bobbers were actually entering a wilderness that was transitory, but one where they had to navigate the landscape of the wilderness in real time.
It's just a fascinating story. Your mention of climate change sort of brings me to a few questions that I thought about while I was reading. So when you first bought your first cabin, I imagine that it was impossible to think about the seismic changes that were going to take place on the property that you had purchased. How has your thinking on the concept of permanence and transition changed over the years that you've had your cabin or that you've been thinking about this?
That's a really good question. Well, there's two different ways to answer it. The deeply personal, close to me sense of permanence kind of changed when I hit 70, because that's when my friends started developing illnesses that you think in the future are going to kill them. They developed cancers, they developed heart problems, they developed like neurological issues, they developed conditions, that diabetes, for example, that are a signal that your body's gonna wear out. So it's not a permanent thing, even though it felt like a permanent thing for most of your life. So that's for me on a personal level. On the environmental level, the concept of impermanence, actually, the title of the book isn't mine. The title of the book came from a committee at the University of Minnesota Press. And we could not, my editor and I could not light on a title that we really liked. And so we decided we just let it rest for a while. And then one day I opened up an email from him and he said, the title of your book is Impermanence. And I thought, what kind of title is that? And then I realized that there was impermanence in every essay. And that was the unifying thread. And then there was a real positive response to that title almost immediately among my Facebook universe. And I realized it was because of its ties to Zen Buddhism, that impermanence is one of the tenets of Buddhist thought, which is that everything is impermanent and suffering is caused when you try to make what is impermanent permanent. Which is a lesson I think I have not learned, but I'm trying really hard to do that. And so, yeah, on a wider scale than just my own personal self, the idea that the living world is impermanent is a really jarring one. Because I think when I realized climate change was definitely going to change the living world, and that it was going to be due to our irresponsibility, I had always thought the living world was going to be permanently in place, even though I was not. And I realize now that that was a misunderstanding, that even if we didn't have climate change, the living world wouldn't be the same place that I would leave. That would be what I experienced after I'm gone, that everything changes, no matter climate change or not climate change.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that sort of personal philosophy. Of course, throughout the book Impermanence, the extraction of natural resources is a very large theme of the book. When you were writing, or just in general, what do you think that people owe future generations when extracting from the earth? What do we owe future people, future animals, future other residents of the earth?
Well, okay, I'm glad you included other animals and plants, because for future generations, it's for me, it's never just about people. It's got to be about everybody that's on this planet. And we owe them a home, for one thing. And it's really remiss if the human population is so large that we take up all the arable land to cultivate food for our species, and don't let any land available for other species like orangutans, allow them to live. So that's the first thing we owe the future is we owe them a home, and we owe them a livable planet. And we're not doing very good on that one either. And I don't know, words just can't rectify it. We just blew it. We blew it with climate change.
What do you hope that readers will take away from reading Impermanence? Are there messages that you hope that they will take with them?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Well, it's very simple. What I hope that the idea that life is short, you will not believe how quickly it passes. And also life is complex. Even the most simple relationship, if you start to look at it, it will open up to be a very complex, knotty problem, knotty. And that every decision is an ethical decision. It's maybe just a simple decision, but there's always a right or wrong. Sometimes it's not clear, and sometimes they are conflicting. They're equally important, but they're conflicting. But there are right and wrong aspects to decision making.
Very good. As you can see from how many folks are on this Zoom, lots of folks really have written to me to tell me how much they enjoyed this book and how much they learned from it. How are readers reacting to this book? Especially if they have any sort of connection or love to Lake Superior. How have folks reacted to it?
People love Lake Superior. That's the first take home. In fact, my editor, when I told him that I was writing on Lake Superior now, he says, well, books on Lake Superior always sell. That was his very first reaction. But he says, but I think we have enough writing on the North Shore. And I said, well, that's good, because I'm not going to write on the North Shore. I'm going to write on the South Shore. And he said, well, that would be great. And as it turns out, he himself had a family cabin on Bark Point outside of Cornucopia, Wisconsin, which is, right on the lake, 20 miles from our cabin. So he was very amenable to that. People like disasters. They really like the Bobber essay, and they like the shipwreck essay. And the shipwreck essay is kind of fun because I don't really go through the tragic traumas that people who have been shipwrecked and don't come up from the bottom. I in most of the shipwrecks on Lake Superior were not like the Fitzgerald, where you have a freighter going off and it breaks apart and sinks and you never see them again. Most of the shipwrecks on Lake Superior are ships that are stranded on sandbars, shoals, hidden reefs, and standing on the shore, you can see the people in these ships and the ship is now listing, and you're compelled to rescue them. And more people were rescued from shipwrecks on Lake Superior than drowned in Lake Superior. So that's kind of an interesting aspect. I think people like that sense that it's dramatic, but has a happy ending.
Yeah.
And people kind of like the swimming one too, where Tom and others are starting out from Bayfield and swimming to Madeline Island. And I do too. I mean, I think it's really a cool idea. It terrifies me to think about swimming 2 miles in Lake Superior like that. But people do it. That race sold out or filled out this past year. In fact, Tom couldn't get in to swim it because there were 600 people ahead of him that wanted to do it.
That is wild. I tried to picture myself in that situation, and it scared me too much to even put my brain in that space.
Right, exactly.
I'm going to transition to some of our reader questions very soon. So for those who are on the Zoom, if you have any questions for Sue, please feel free to type those in at any time. You're talking about the shipwreck essay, sort of jogged something for me. I think sometimes it can be so easy for us to think of things like shipwrecks as something that's like of a previous time, that's from the past. It's been so, especially like with the Fitzgerald, it's legend, a sad and tragic legend. But when you were sort of researching that, I mean, is this something that, Superior is so powerful and so big. I felt like your essay brought us into the present on that. How was it to learn more about shipwrecks on Superior? And did
Well,
you learn
there's
anything surprising?
a historian in Marquette, Michigan. No, yes, Marquette, who is Frederick Stonewall, who has done quite a bit of work on the shipwrecks, and um it was fascinating. And what is really cool is that if you look, there are remnants all over from the shipwrecks that happened. For example, in Eagle River on the Keweenaw Peninsula, you see the pilot house for one of the ships that went down on Thanksgiving Day at the early turn of the last century, early 1900s. And you can go right up to the pilot house and climb over it and take a look inside. And it was what remained. The ship was listing on a shoal, but it was not sinking. And so the captain and his crew invited the Coast Guard, who came up to them to inquire if they were okay. They invited them to Thanksgiving dinner. So they had Thanksgiving dinner on the ship. And then the Coast Guard left, and then the ship sank. So, so that's how the pilot house ended up on the shore. And then, yeah, I think I closed that essay with my favorite one about the boat that had the cars from Detroit on it. And you
That
can
was
see one of these
fascinating.
cars. They still have one of the cars in the Keweenaw Historical Society's like a garage. So that's very fun to see that remnant. So they're all over. The anchor I mentioned, that there was an anchor that one boat hauled from, it must be Copper Harbor all the way across to, was it Two Harbors? And then they finally went into Ashlandsport and they took it off. They took off this anchor, and I think they never figured out whose anchor it was. But that is also in Eagle Harbor, Michigan right now. Yeah. So the ghosts are still with us. That's what's really cool.
For sure. I've got one more question for you, and then I'll transition over to our reader questions. Are you working on any new books or essays now, in case anyone wants to look forward to something new?
Well, I'm writing essays. I will say it's harder now because my solitude, my daily solitude is gone because my husband has retired. And because we have so much fun together, I want to go do things with him while we can, while we still are active. And so it's just, he's very supportive, and he would like me to sit down at my desk and write, but I need 3, 4, 5 hours to do that. And he would also like to go on a bike ride to the park, So it's not as easy as it used to be. I ended Impermanence telling people that I think I'd said everything I wanted to say. I don't know if that's exactly true. And I know there's a certain element of my writing is pure entertainment, and I think I could entertain more. So yes, I'm waffling because I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, hopefully we will all have something to see from you soon, or not, whatever you decide to do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to transition now to some really great questions that we've gotten from our participants. Patty asked, first of all, whether you're at your cabin right now. And she said it was so fun and interesting to hear the specifics about your old cabin and your new cabin. And she just wondering about sort of how you're enjoying life in your new cabin.
That's a nice question. Thank you, Patty. I was at the cabin yesterday. We were there for 3 weeks, and I came home in large part because my 2 granddaughters, ages 5 and 2, were at the cabin with us, and I was afraid I couldn't get through a Zoom without their interference. So I thought we better get the heck out of here. The new cabin is perfect. I will say, it was well designed by our daughter, and it is exactly what we wanted. And I have the third, which is not a bedroom, because the architect said that a 3-cabin bedroom is not a small cabin, and this is a small cabin, so you only have 2. So the third space is a writing room, and it's the best room I've ever had for writing, and it's got windows on two walls, and it doesn't have a view of the lake, but it does have a view of the woods and the birds. So it's perfect to sit down and write. And I have a pocket doors I can shut so I can close myself off. And you'd think I could get a book out of a perfect writing space like that. So we'll see. What was the
That's
other? Oh, the
wonderful.
old cabin. The old cabin is down. We tore it
Okay.
down Memorial Day weekend. And I was very happy that we did it then because the Phoebes hadn't come back yet and to start their nest. And they had had a nest for 35 years on our old cabin underneath the eaves. And those Phoebes, I didn't want to surprise them with the information that they were going to have to build this year. So, but you know what? They did come back, and by that time the old cabin was down, and they decided that they wanted to put up a nest on the eaves of our outpost, which is a small shed between our new cabin and the cliff. And so they raised a happy clutch this year, and the old cabin went down, and it's now was sown with like ryegrass so it didn't erode. And it's an open space, which I had hoped we would keep mowed for, you know, like family games like bocce ball, and but it's not. Apparently, there's wood ticks and the mowers that don't want to mow there. That would be our family members. So it's going to go back to woods. Yeah.
I see. I see. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of your family, one of our participants named Wendy asks, where are your family now? And are your children involved in environmental activities or professions?
Yes, they are actually. The oldest child is a working geologist with the USGS in Madison, Wisconsin. And he's very involved with groundwater. And he is very anti-car. He does everything he possible to not use a car, including his two daughters have never gone to daycare in a car. They ride bicycles, even in the winter. He's got a what that's called an urban arrow. It's a cargo bike with a huge container, a huge compartment in front of the bicyclists where they put the girls and sacks of groceries and off they go. The second child is the architect, and she's very interested in, of course, green design. The third child was a science teacher at a middle school in a Minneapolis suburb, and he is actually he and his wife, another teacher, are opening up a running shop in Stillwater, Minnesota this season. And then the youngest one is a children's book editor, and of course she and her whole staff are always into children's nonfiction books that teach them about either about animals or about the environment. It's very hard for millennials not to be involved in the environment. I think it looms so big in their life. Climate change looms such a huge, they are not inaccurate in being apprehensive about their future. So they know these things.
Thank you for sharing that. Lawrence wanted to know if you'd spent any time on Isle Royal.
I have. Yes, I think I write about that trip in my book Portage. Tom and I, for an anniversary, took the Voyager 2 over there, and we took a canoe rather than a kayak. And because I think people divide themselves into two categories, kayakers and canoeists, and we're canoeists. But you know, Lake Superior isn't always kind towards canoes, and the waves can get pretty high. The plan was we were going to go to McCargo Bay, and then we were going to take a portage over the crests of Isle Royal and then down the hill and to the other side and catch the boat back to the Minnesota shore. And then we took a look at that crest and we thought, we don't want to do that. And so the other alternative was to go around the tip of Isle Royal, the northeast tip. But we've also heard stories that like a Park Service boat had gone around the tip unsuspecting and had its windows blown out because it on the wind side of the island is super stormy. So we thought, oh, this is a gamble. So we ended up getting up like at 4:30 in the morning and breaking camp by 4:45. and being around the tip so that the lake was pretty calm in the early morning. And we did it. It's very memorable. And that was before they transplanted the wolves from Michipicoten onto Isle Royal. There were still wolves, but there was a lot more moose, and man, there were moose everywhere, and they were chomping at trees in the campgrounds, and they come right into your camp. A mother moose with her baby right into where we were putting up our tent. It was just kind of nerve-wracking. But that's another thing I think about Isle Royal is all the moose everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wild place, literally.
Yeah.
Nancy had said she has an experience, and she was curious about whether you had any more information. So she said, our cabin is near Sleeping Bear Dunes, and I remember the challenges in obtaining the properties and found your tale about the development of the Apostle Islands to be really interesting. She wondered if there were any other parts of that story that you didn't include in the essay that she could learn from.
The story of the Apostle Island?
Yeah, and sort of the development.
Story.
Yeah.
Well, there is the party line, which is that the human elements have been removed and the islands are in the process of being rewilding, which is kind of like a buzzword now. And I think there is a certain amount of maybe even relief to think that the human mark is not permanent, that if you back off, nature will come back, and you can't tell that we had any mark on the environment in the first place. That doesn't work so well with the apostles because there was quarrying. They quarried stone, red sandstone from it, and so you see the straight lines of the quarry. And it's not that I don't appreciate that perspective, but I think people that are interested in seeing how the national park was set up with the Apostle Islands, this is the story they get. They don't get the story of the human story of what people expected and didn't get. And again, that's a complicated thing also, because I've been on the other side of the fence where I've been the outsider looking in and saying, okay, this is what they need to do. We need to stop float planes coming into the boundary waters. We need to stop the motorboats coming into the boundary waters so that we can have a quiet experience, a quote unquote wilderness experience. And I don't know what constitutes an outsider in that aspect. I belong to the same state, and more importantly, it's federal land, so I belong to the same country. But again, I can also appreciate the people from Italy that are frustrated when outsiders that don't understand how they live come in and tell them what they can and cannot do. Like I said, life is complicated.
Absolutely. That was another theme that really sort of ran through a lot of the essays that you had, is that it's complex, and there are lots of viewpoints on sort of what can and should be done when it comes to natural resources. Mary wondered if there were essays or topics that didn't make it into this book that you had been considering.
There were actually. The first one that comes to mind was there is a wildlife refuge in the central part of the Bayfield Peninsula. It's a little bit away from Lake Superior, but it is influenced by the lake, of course. And it's really cool because although it looks like it was farmed and then replanted, which is true, it actually has been an attractive place for a small group of Kirtland's warblers to set up homes and breed. And Kirtland's warblers are these little fussy little warblers on the eastern part of the Lower Peninsula that have really narrow requirements for nest sites, and so that they were only found on the Ausable River at one point, and they were down to like 22 birds. They're doing better now, but in part they're doing better because they have pushed out beyond their first breeding site in two places like this Bayfield Peninsula. But I didn't, that category, that essay didn't fit into my categories. After I set the categories up, I thought this is one of the weaker essays, so I dropped it. You know, I can't think of another essay that I actually wrote and tried to polish and then didn't put it in. There was one I did add right at the end, and that was the one on climate change and cross-country skiing. I thought really, you know, I could use another essay on the Marquette area. And there's essays that I could write on the Marquette area that I didn't. There was one woman, we met her cross-country skiing, and well, you know, people that cross-country ski have the same kind of mindset, and she said, she was telling us about her group's fight to prevent a silver mine, I think, from reestablishing in the area. And she said, we fought that mine so hard. And then she didn't say anything else. And the implication was, and it didn't do any good at all. And every time I think of Minnesotans and copper mining on near the boundary waters, I think, we fought that mine so hard. and then leave it hanging because, you know, it's still not finished. The question is not answered. Or as Mike Wiggins would say, the Wendigo is sleeping.
Yeah, that was a really fascinating portion of the book. I just saw one additional question come in here. Oh, Melissa asked, have you read the fiction written by Ellen Airgood set on the South Shore of Superior further east? For Culture Club, we previously read one of her books called Tin Camp Road. And in a lot of her books, she talks about sort of the culture and the geography of that space. So she was curious if you'd ever read any of her work.
Yeah, she's the one who wrote from Grand Marais, Michigan, right? She says,
yeah.
Yes, I have. I really like it. She's a little quirky, but yeah. And Grand Marais, Michigan, gosh, it's such a great place. I can see why you'd want to set a story in that town. Yes, I have read. I read. She had two, I think she has two, and I've read them both.
Yes, we read Tin Camp Road for this, and then there's, I think, South of Superior as well as another of hers. I'm actually headed up to the UP to go camping in a couple of weeks, and she has a bakery there that I may stop by.
Cool.
So,
cool.
Yeah. We're coming near the end of our time here, and I want to make sure I respect your time and all of our readers' time. But one final concluding question that I had was, you know, you clearly did so much research to bring this book to life. Are there any books or anything else that you'd recommend that our readers take in, or documentaries, or anything that you think that our readers should look into if they enjoyed Impermanence?
Okay, documentaries. The Bad River Band put out a documentary called Bad River. That's the title of it. And it gives a background of the band and how they came to their reservation and have tended it for hundreds of years. And it does talk about their fight to preserve the Pinocchio Range so that the headwaters of the Kakagan and Bad Rivers are safe from pollution. So that's the first thing I recommend. Oh, shoot. Nothing else is coming to mind right now. And I mean, I wish I had thought about that a little bit, because there's lots of good books on the UP that I've in Lake Superior. Oh, she is a professor out of Michigan Tech, wrote something on Superior. Nancy Langston. She wrote a blurb. Yeah, Nancy Langston. The title of the book is Sustaining Lake Superior. That is a really good book by a climate scientist. Yeah, those are the two I'd recommend.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation, and I really enjoyed the book. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Jackie now to close us out for the afternoon.
Thank you so much, Sue and Amber, for participating here. A reminder for all of our guests today, we'll be posting the recording on Bridge Michigan's website this week. The recording will also show on our events page on our new app, so don't forget to download that if you have not already. Culture Club events are held every other month, so please stay tuned for our next event in October, which will be our last for 2024. You will not want to miss it. And a reminder that if you'd like to be eligible to receive our next Culture Club selection, please consider becoming a Bridge Club member today. And that's all, folks. Thanks again and have a great day.